The main event of 2024 was the ongoing bloody war in Ukraine, which exacerbated relations between the West and the axis of evil. The latter behaved extremely aggressively, hinting at the inevitability of the last clash in the Third World War mode. It turned out that the war in Ukraine is not just Putin's aggression, that this event could well be called a Russian-Chinese war against Ukraine. With the involvement of the Chinese satellite, the DPRK. Iran, which supplied Russia with drones and missiles, was removed from this game by the persistent efforts of Israel, which acted on principle and ignored Washington's reproaches and condemning UN resolutions. Netanyahu did not consult with the indecisive Biden and gave the order to destroy the leader of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah. This year, Israel practically defeated the Iranian proxies, Hamas and Hezbollah, and also struck Iranian targets, closing Tehran's ability to produce missiles for at least the next year or two. All this, coupled with the energy crisis, has sharply weakened Iran, and now, according to the head of Mossad, David Barnea, it is necessary to strike not even at the Houthis, but directly at the Iranian Ayatollahs, up to a regime change in Tehran. Assad's flight from Syria to Russia after the successful offensive of the opposition forces drove Putin out of this region and called into question Russia's presence on the African continent. It is clear that this game was played with the participation of the United States, Israel, and Turkey. The war in the Middle East is entering its final geopolitical phase, when the main players will distribute the prizes, but after the Iranian issue is resolved. The great geopolitician Putin has been thrown to the sidelines of decision-making. All that remains for him is to gather his mothballed brothers who lead other fragments of the USSR for informal summits. But even here, not everything is smooth. Pashinyan ignored the last summit, and Aliyev turned around and flew away as soon as it became known that the Russians shot down a civilian airliner flying from Baku to Grozny with their air defense system. Now Moscow is making a worried face, unconscious, and trying to convince everyone around that we have nothing to do with it. The plane collided with a flock of birds, so there is no need to speculate. What kind of Istanbul agreements Putin will gurgle about in his toilet under such circumstances is completely unclear. In addition, his zombie economics is barely crawling around the cave, crushed by stagflation. Nabiullina's gadgets do not help, and the cave oligarchy, having conspired with the government, has completely rejected her methods of resisting inflation. It was decided to drag it out somehow until everything finally collapses. What the Kremlin is counting on is unclear. Perhaps on Trump, who will move into the White House on January 20, 2025, and whose return was prayed for by the entire cave community. But Trump is not a panacea, he is not a king and not a dictator, although he demonstrates the habits of an unbridled baboon. In addition, before his arrival, the eternally late Biden may still have time to slightly wipe his own mess by introducing deadly sanctions on the bald oil fleet, cutting across the world and bringing Putin the lion's share of money for the war. This injection from Grandpa will be fast-acting, and its effect will be felt in the cave in a month or two, when the money simply runs out. Moreover, on everything at once, and no China will plug such a financial gap. In such conditions, the system will have to either frantically demand peace, playing along with Trump's peacekeeping efforts, or abandon the warlike discourse and its main symbol, Putin. Make it sudden, bury it and arrange a new reset with the reformatting of the cave into some kind of parliamentary confederation. But all this is later. In the meantime, the year ends with the creeping influx of the cave into Ukraine, with wild losses and a threatening growl from the Kremlin towards the West. The shaking of the Oreshnik and the Christmas missile attacks on the energy system of Ukraine demonstrate the infernal nature of the Putin regime, but this is no longer a secret to anyone. Europe, with all its declarations of unwavering support for Ukraine, whispers about its own fatigue, and the untied populists Orban and Fico are already openly licking the loins of the bald man, who brazenly lies about his readiness to supply gas to Europe and the depoliticization of the economy. In 2024, Europe itself has clearly swung to the right, where right-wing forces in Austria and the Netherlands, France and Germany have revived. In Britain, the Conservatives have fallen, and the leader of the Labour Party, Keir Starmer, has become the country's Prime Minister. The axis of evil hopes for a change in the political weather on the European continent through the activation of far-right forces, but already feels its own weakness. Squeals about the Kremlin's readiness to clash with NATO in a few years contradict today's opportunities, the window of which will narrow even more in 2025. So far, Moscow is only capable of hybrid attacks, the number of which has increased significantly, from cyber attacks to the rupture of fiber optic cables and spontaneous combustion of cargo on DHL planes. But 4 years of Trump's presidency could become a serious test for Moscow's main ally, Beijing. Therefore, the picture of a geopolitical confrontation with an attempt on Istanbul as a new Yalta is very vague for the Kremlin. The end of 24 marks the intermediate result of the axis of evil war against the West as a hot phase, with the prospect of Moscow's defeat and the weakening of Beijing. Zelensky will not repeat Assad's flight, which, by the way, he could have done in February 2022, but did not. And the people of Ukraine will never give up their territories. This territorial itch of Trump, with Kiev's refusal of its lands and Washington's annexation of Greenland and Canada, is already manifesting itself as a sign of coming revisionism. But again, all this will begin to influence the world in the future. In the meantime, we will record the moment. Putin did not win, Assad fled, Haniyeh and Nasrallah are dead. Tehran is lying low, Beijing is tense, and the grandfather who is going down in history is capable of slamming the door loudly, so loudly that the windows in the Kremlin will fly out.